Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Looking around the room, I see so many familiar faces and friends. If we haven't met, I'm terribly sorry that we haven't met until tonight. I'm Rabbi David Lyon. If you're a part of the larger community, we welcome you here to Congregation Beth Israel. One of our pleasures is always to present a full year of adult education offerings, and from the fall through the spring, we are never disappointed, and I'm sure that tonight will be an equal delight for all of us who engage in Torah study and Jewish thinking periodically or on a regular basis or from time to time. And especially tonight, what a perfect time to be together during the week as the new calendar year unfolds. This is a perfect opportunity to engage in some New Year's resolutions, to learn, to study, and to invest ourselves in our Jewish thinking and Jewish life. As we continue this evening, you'll see that there are some refreshments to my left. Books will be for sale after the program, and during the program, Dr. Matt will be speaking naturally and lecturing, teaching, and then inviting you to ask any questions that you might have later in the evening. So it should be a full experience, a beautiful evening for all of us to share. And I'm going to invite the co-chairs of the Adult Education Committee to come forward to make other introductions. But I'm very grateful, and I hope that you'll help me welcome David Scott and Bradley Rauch, who are members of the congregation, co-chairs of the committee, and who do just an extraordinary job in pulling all the parts together so that we can enjoy everything that we've come here to learn together. David and Brad, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi. Well, first of all, thank you all so much for being here. We're thrilled to have Dr. Matt with us. And before we introduce him, I wanted to just briefly mention a couple of the other programs we have coming up in the next few months here at Beth Israel with our adult education. I hope everybody was able to receive one of these flyers. If not, there's still some more, and we have several. But we've been fortunate to become a part of the 92nd Street Y, which is in New York City, and it's one of the largest collections of places where Jewish thinkers and speakers come to perform and to give lectures and interviews on a whole host and variety of topics. And part of our opportunity includes being able to participate through simulcast, big screens in the social hall, and invite members of the community to come and listen and engage through live questions. We can even ask questions of our scholars and speakers on any given night. Beth Israel has decided to participate and will be featuring Mandy Patinkin on February 6th, and that'll be here at 7 o'clock. We'll start registration at 6:30. Future programs in the spring include George Mitchell, former senator and UN Special Envoy to the Middle East, who will also be speaking. That one's March 13th at 7 o'clock. And then Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State, will also participate. And again, these are awesome opportunities for us all to learn from world leaders and thinkers. And so I encourage all of us to participate, and you're all welcome.
Open to the community.
Yes, all of you are welcome. It's open to the community. So thank you again for being here tonight.
Tonight we are blessed and pleased to have one of the leading authorities on the Kabbalah, and I will venture to say the leading authority on the Zohar, which is Dr. Daniel Matt from Berkeley, California. Dr. Matt has for 12 years undertaken a monumental task of translating into English as well as annotating the Zohar, which is the major work of Kabbalah. 6 volumes have now been published, all of which are represented here and are available for purchase, and 6 more to come. Dr. Matt has spent 12 years so far doing this, and he told us he's got 3 more years to go, after which I hope he'll take a deserved rest. Dr. Matt has also published more than 10 books relating to Kabbalah Jewish mysticism. He has been featured in Time magazine, on the History Channel, and NPR. For 20 years, he has served as a professor of the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California, and has also taught at Stanford University and Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He also confessed that his first teaching job was at the University of Texas, so we'll add that to his list of accomplishments. Dr. Matt does not get to Houston very often, and he is the leading authority on this subject matter, so we are very pleased to welcome him. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really a treat to be here. Why should anyone care about a book written 700 years ago in medieval Spain, composed in Aramaic, a language no longer spoken hardly anywhere in the world? Why would anyone read a book that's intentionally cryptic and perplexing? Why? Because the Zohar challenges our understanding of God and of human existence, daring us to transform ourselves. The Zohar shatters childish theological images and discovers a God called infinity, Ein Sof. Ein Sof transcends gender and personality. But in the realm of the Sefirot, the 10 qualities of God, the picture you have in front of you, God is equally male and female. Shekhinah and the Holy One, blessed be He. Israel's spiritual task is to unite these male and female halves of God through living a holy life. Every human action affects the divine couple, either promoting or hindering their union. God is not static being, but dynamic becoming. The Zohar is a vast commentary on the Torah and the masterpiece of Kabbalah. How did it emerge? Let's begin by briefly tracing the roots of Kabbalah. Kabbalah crystallized in Provence and Spain in the 12th and 13th centuries, but the mystical stream within Judaism issues from biblical and rabbinic sources. For example, I just mentioned Ein Sof, infinity. This is certainly one of the key insights of Kabbalah, the boundlessness of God, His indefinability. The idea of Ein Sof is a radical innovation, dependent in part on Maimonides and his conception of God. But there's an ancient precursor right in the Torah, in the book of Exodus, when Moses learns God's secret name at the burning bush. Eheyeh asher eheyeh. I am who I am. I will be who I will be. Right there you could say that God is refusing to spell out his essence. The open-endedness of God is right there at the beginning of Jewish history, and Kabbalah just really opens it a little further. Of the various visions of God in the Bible, the most graphic account is undoubtedly the opening chapter of Ezekiel. Standing by a river in Babylon, the prophet sees a throne whirling through heaven, accompanied by 4 winged creatures darting to and fro. On the throne is a figure with the appearance of a human being, surrounded by radiance like a rainbow. Ezekiel experienced this vision near the beginning of the 6th century BCE. Even before his book was canonized in the Bible, his vision had become the archetype of Jewish mystical ascent. Until the emergence of Kabbalah, Jewish spiritual seekers used Ezekiel's account as their model. It came to be called Ma'aseh Merkavah, the account of God's chariot throne, an account that was studied, expounded, and re-experienced. An entire literature developed, recounting the visionary exploits of those who followed in Ezekiel's footsteps. Among them, some of the leading figures of Rabbinic Judaism, such as Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael. The mystical journey was arduous and dangerous, requiring intense ascetic preparation and precise knowledge of secret passwords in order to be admitted to the various heavenly palaces guarded by menacing angels. Among the prerequisites were knowledge of Torah, observance of the mitzvot, and ethical purity. The final goal was to attain a vision of the divine figure on the throne. Over the following centuries, individuals and small groups pondered the secrets of Ezekiel's account of the chariot, developing techniques of meditation, refining their conception of God. As Jews migrated from the Middle East to Europe, these techniques and speculations spread to the West. Certain mystical teachings were referred to as Kabbalah, literally receiving that which has been received, or tradition. Gradually, the term Kabbalah was applied to the whole body of mystical tradition. Toward the end of the 12th century, in the fertile region of Provence, we find an active circle of Kabbalists in the middle of a vibrant Jewish community, whose culture encompassed rabbinic law, philosophy, and mysticism. From Provence, Kabbalistic teachings spread southward, spilling over the Pyrenees into Spain. It was here, in 13th century Spain, that the movement of Kabbalah crystallized. Its masterpiece was Sefer Zohar. What is the Zohar? The word means literally radiance or splendor, based on a verse in the book of Daniel. V'hamaskilim yazhiru k'zohar harakia. The enlightened will shine like the Zohar, like the radiance of the sky. The Zohar seemed to appear out of nowhere. Around the year 1280, a Spanish Kabbalist named Moses de Leon began circulating booklets of biblical commentary. These were the first installments, you might say, of the Zohar. Written in lyrical Aramaic, sparkling with invented words, arcane symbolism, and erotic imagery. The tales and teachings were puzzling yet enchanting. Moses de Leon claimed that he was merely the scribe, copying from an ancient manuscript. The original had supposedly been composed over 1,000 years earlier in the circle of Rabbi Shimon, son of Yochai, the famous disciple of Rabbi Akiva, who lived in the 2nd century in the land of Israel. According to rabbinic tradition, Rabbi Shimon had hid from the Roman authorities in a cave for 13 years. Kabbalists imagined that the Zohar was conceived in that cave. Then somehow the text made its way from Galilee to Spain, and Moses de Leon was making copies available. In other words, and this is really one of the great mysteries of the Zohar was written in the 13th century in Spain, and yet the author never admitted that he was the author. He claimed he was copying from an ancient manuscript that went back over 1,000 years earlier. Now, why didn't he come out and say, I'm writing a book, and here it is? Perhaps because of the radical ideas he was trying to promote. For example, the notion of the feminine half of God that I mentioned just in passing, and we'll look at more in detail very soon. This is probably the boldest contribution of the Kabbalah. In some ways, it's a revival of the ancient myth of the goddess, which was supposedly expunged by Judaism. Now, if Moses de Leon had come out and said, I have an idea, God is a woman, this might not have gone over very well. But now it was the ancient Rabbi Shimon, the venerated sage of the Mishnah, who was making these teachings, conveyed by Moses de Leon. Rabbi Shimon was describing Shekhinah, celebrating her exploits, tracing her romance with her divine male partner. The guise of ancient authority was certainly one factor in Moses de Leon's decision to write pseudepigraphically, attributing the Zohar to the ancient Rabbi Shimon. But perhaps de Leon actually believed that he could commune with the ancient Rabbi Shimon, that he was channeling ancient wisdom. And then we have to say that there might have been a more down-to-earth motivation as well. This is revealed in a medieval story, something supposedly said by the wife of Moses de Leon. You see, Moses de Leon died in the year 1305 approximately, leaving his widow without much money. A rich Kabbalist offered her a large sum if she would show him the original manuscript from which de Leon claimed to have copied the Zohar. His wife, however, said she couldn't produce any manuscript because her husband, quote, wrote what he did from his own mind. And when I saw him writing without any material before him, I used to say to him, why do you tell everybody you're copying from a book when you have no book and you're writing from your own head? Wouldn't it be better for you to say that the work was your own creation? Then you'd get more credit. According to this report, her husband, Moses de Leon, replied, if I told them my secret and that what I wrote was my own invention, they wouldn't listen to my words and they wouldn't pay anything for them because they'd say I made it all up. But now when they hear that I'm copying passages from the Zohar written under the influence of the Holy Spirit by Rabbi Shimon, son of Yochai, they pay a lot of money for them, as you can see. As you can see. This story may be an invention, but it's likely that financial considerations were also a factor in Moses de Leon's narrative scheme. By attributing his work to the ancient Rabbi Shimon, Moses de Leon convinced many people to accept and respect the Zohar. Few dared to challenge the authority of the ancient Rabbi Shimon, son of Yochai. And gradually the Zohar became HaZohar HaKadosh, the Holy Zohar, the canonical text of Kabbalah. Nearly all of subsequent Kabbalah is based on the teachings and poetry of the Zohar. In fact, many people say the Zohar is the third holiest book in Judaism, after the Torah and the Talmud. Some people go even further and say it's the holiest book in Judaism, because after all, the Zohar is not an independent composition. It's a commentary on the Torah. So it claims to find the deepest level of meaning in the Torah. If the Zohar really reveals the deepest secret meaning of the holiest book, then the Zohar itself is the holiest book. And many, many Jews over the centuries have regarded it as such. Only in recent times, relatively, has Moses de Leon's actual role become clear. More than a scribe, he was the composer of the Zohar, though he certainly drew on earlier material, and he may have collaborated with other Kabbalists. Composed in the 13th century, yet ascribed to ancient sources. Maybe this is why the Zohar calls its teachings Milin Chaditin Atikin, new ancient words, because they are simultaneously new and ancient, written right then in 13th century Spain, but attributed to an ancient source, brand new, but conveying eternal wisdom. It's that combination of new and ancient that I think makes the Zohar and the Kabbalah so intriguing. Because the Zohar has a dialectical relationship with tradition, firmly rooted in the Bible, yet thriving on new discovery. We often find interpretations introduced as follows, quote, this verse has already been discussed, but come and see. This verse has already been established, but come and see. In other words, come and discover a new possible meaning in the Torah. The Zohar celebrates creativity. Perhaps Moses de Leon picked up some of his enthusiasm from another Kabbalist, Jacob the son of Sheshet, who says, quote, it's a mitzvah for every person to innovate in Torah according to his capacity. After one of these innovations, this particular Kabbalist, the son of Sheshet, writes, don't think that this is far-fetched. If I hadn't invented it in my mind, I would say that it was transmitted to Moses at Mount Sinai. That's a remarkable statement. In other words, he's aware that it's his own creative interpretation, but it sounds so deeply true to him It resonates so deeply with his inner sense of truth that he's convinced it could have gone back all the way to Mount Sinai. Brand new and yet ancient. New ancient words. As I've mentioned, most of the Torah is written as a mystical commentary on the Torah. It penetrates the simple meaning of the text, searching for something beneath the surface, something more profound. Quote, "There's not a single word or letter in the Torah that does not contain sublime and precious secrets." The message throughout is, don't be content with a simple meaning. Question the text. Questioning becomes a supreme value. Verse by verse, the Zohar surprises and challenges the reader. Each biblical verse is just the starting point, a springboard for the imagination. The Zohar is primarily a biblical commentary, but it's shaped as a kind of mystical novel. Rabbi Shimon and his students wander through the hills of Galilee, sharing secrets of Torah. Now and then they encounter strange characters on the road. A little child amazes them with wisdom. A beggar enriches them with precious teachings. A cantankerous old donkey driver who seems to be a total idiot turns out, of course, to be a sage in disguise. The Zohar, you could say, is a medieval experiment in fiction, a hidden treasure of civilization. Think of Dante's Divine Comedy. This is written just a few decades after the Zohar. The Zohar is also journeying through realms of heaven and hell. One of its central themes is the mystery of the eternal feminine, both human and divine. Or think of Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales, written about a century after the Zohar. The Zohar is also describing a kind of pilgrimage, devotees of Torah journeying to discover Shekhinah, the divine presence. As in Chaucer, these travels are enriched by tales. Think finally of Don Quixote, written in Spain about 300 years after the Zohar. The rabbis of the Zohar are also engaged in a fantastic quest to vanquish evil, to mend the world. If Don Quixote is a knight errant, a wandering knight, then the hero of the Zohar, Rabbi Shimon, is a saint errant, a holy man, wandering in search of wisdom. The plot of the Zohar focuses ultimately on the inner life of God, the 10 Sefirot, the divine qualities. By probing the text of the Torah, the rabbis of the Zohar discover hints of God's dynamic being, verse by verse. Take a look now at that packet you have in front of you. I want to look just for a few minutes at this chart at the beginning. I don't plan to go through this in any great detail. We'd be here past midnight. I promised the rabbi we'd go no later than 11:30. So just really a few highlights here. This is a picture of God. Now that, of course, is an impossible statement to make in a synagogue. I'm surprised I wasn't ejected immediately. But what saves that from being heretical is that you could say the ultimate reality of God is the white space around these circles, and then extending in all directions out to Ein Sof, out to infinity. Ultimately, God is infinite. God cannot be depicted. That's what Kabbalah teaches. But the Zohar has very little to say about the infinite. What can you really say about infinity? Ultimately, God is infinity. So what are these 10 spheres or these 10 Sefirot? These are aspects of the infinite God. God as infinity cannot be described. So instead, the Zohar describes these particular aspects of the infinite. Let's leave the top 3 for a moment. We'll come to those in a little bit. I want to look at the triad right below the top 3. On the right it says Chesed. The name in the circle in English is the same as the Hebrew letters. So Chesed on the right. Its polar opposite is Gevurah on the left. And in the middle is Tiferet. Now, chesed literally means, and in each case, the literal meaning is in small capital letters over to the side of each circle. Chesed means literally love. So this is God's quality of love, a divine love that's almost too much to bear. In fact, if there were just divine love, the world would be drowning in that love. Or you might say the unethical people, the wicked people would get away with murder, literally, if God only loved the world. So that love has to be balanced with its polar opposite on the left, gevurah, meaning power, but also known as din, judgment. So the opposition here, the polarity is between love and judgment. God's free-flowing love, God's infinite grace, and God's strict judgment. If God were just to judge the world, none of us would survive very long. If God would just love the world, none of us would survive very long, because the wicked would get away with murder. So it's a balance between love and judgment, between God's grace and God's power, or God's strict judgment. That is how we reach a state of Tiferet, in the middle. Tiferet literally means beauty, but I think it's better understood as harmony. Harmony between the opposites. And it's really this triad of the Sefirot that I think rings most true psychologically. I think we all have that sense of love and its opposite. Another name for that Sefirah on the left, in addition to being called Gevurah, power, or Din, judgment, it's also known as Pachad, fear. That word I did not write down here, but that's one of its names, fear. Think of love and fear as opposites. Right? Sometimes you fall in love with someone, at other points you might be terrified of that same person. Love and fear somehow often come together as opposites. In fact, I think the ideal is to be in love with the world, to be in love with life, and to have some sense of awe or fear. Not just love, but awe. To balance love and awe, or to balance love and fear, is what the Zohar is suggesting here. In other words, these are divine qualities, but also human experiences. That's the remarkable thing about the Sefirot. They're a map of God, but also a map of the inner psyche. And very often in the Zohar you wonder, are they talking about God or are they talking about us? And the Zohar wants you to confuse those two, to confuse the human and the divine. You would think there has to be a sharp line between the human and the divine. But one of the central teachings of mysticism is that there's not a sharp boundary between the human and the divine. The human can actually discover the divine within. And that's what the Sefirot are. They're an exploration, they're a map of how to explore God, but they're a map of also how to explore deep within yourself to find that divine spark, to find these divine qualities manifesting right in our own lives. The Zohar, as I said, is a biblical commentary. Now, how can you possibly find these qualities in the Bible? Very easy for the Zohar. The Zohar says, for example, Abraham actually embodied the quality of chesed. Why? You may remember stories of Abraham sitting out by his tent with the flaps of the tent open, looking out for strangers. Abraham, according to the Midrash, according to the rabbinic commentaries, would welcome strangers into his tent. So Abraham, you could say, embodied this quality of chesed. Abraham lived out chesed in his life, and thereby he attained that sefirah. He attained that divine rung of chesed. Now what about Isaac, the second of the three patriarchs? What was Isaac's primal religious experience? He didn't go to Hebrew school. He didn't go to summer camp. What was his primal religious experience? Almost being killed by his father in the name of God, right? He was bound on the altar. Isaac's primal experience of God was one of pachad, was one of fear or terror. So for the Zohar, he embodies that sefirah on the left, known as gevurah, power, or pachad, fear. In fact, some of you may know this, there's actually a name for God in Genesis, Pachad Yitzchak, the fear of Isaac. It's a divine name that appears only twice in the whole Bible, in the book of Genesis. It's a name of God, Pachad Yitzchak. I think this reflects the pachad, the fear, the terror that Isaac experienced on the altar. And that colored his experience, his religious experience for the rest of his life. So Abraham attained the quality of chesed, Isaac attained the quality of gevurah, or din, judgment, or pachad, fear. What about Jacob? Jacob was the third of the patriarchs. He was the resolution of this conflict. He becomes identified with the Sefirah of Tiferet, whose full name is actually Tiferet Yisrael, the beauty of Israel. And Yisrael is, after all, another name for Jacob. Right? Jacob, after wrestling with the angel, has a new name. His name is Yisrael, the name that we all bear. So Jacob somehow synthesized or harmonized these opposite qualities of love and fear, and he attained a place of fullness or completion. That's an example of how the Zohar finds these qualities of God right in the biblical text. Verse by verse, the Zohar will reread the Bible as a way of discovering the inner dynamics, not just of the characters described in the text, but of God's own inner life. Since we have the chart, let me just show you another highlight here. Tiferet is the central Sefirah. I said in a sense it's harmonizing everything, but Tiferet is also incomplete because Tiferet is male, and the male needs to unite with the female, the last of the 10 Sefirot, Malchut. Malchut literally means kingdom, but I'll refer to her tonight as Shekhinah, meaning the presence, the divine presence of God. Now, there are other feminine qualities in this Sefirot. For example, near the top on the left, Bina. Bina is considered the divine mother. But the romance of the Zohar, the major theme of the Zohar, is the partnership, the marriage between Tiferet, known also as the Holy One, blessed be He, or the Blessed Holy One, and Malchut, or Shekhinah. The goal of Judaism, the goal of life, according to Kabbalah, is to unite the male and female halves of God. And we'll come to this soon. Beyond all the Sefirot is, as I mentioned, Ein Sof. Literally, Ein Sof, there is no end. The endlessness of God, the infinity of God. This is a new name invented by Kabbalah, but indebted to Maimonides, the great Jewish philosopher, who advanced a theory that some people refer to as negative theology. Sounds like a very strange term, negative theology. What does negative theology mean? It doesn't mean that, there is no God. It's not an atheism. Negative theology is simply, don't try to describe God because you can't. All that's legitimate is to say what God is not. That was Maimonides' approach. That's why it's called negative theology. Say that God is not limited. God is not powerless. Don't try to describe what God is because you won't do it justice. All you can do is remove what's false about God, and maybe you'll end up with some understanding of the divine. As Maimonides puts it, the description of God by means of negations is the correct description. With every increase in the negations regarding God, you come nearer to the apprehension of God. So if we're using a name for God, really what Kabbalah says is that all names for God are inadequate. But if we're going to use a name, Ein Sof is pretty good. There is no end, infinite. Sometimes the Kabbalists go further. They use even a more radical name for God. What could be more radical than saying God is infinity? I think the most radical name for God you find in Kabbalah or in all of mysticism is to call God nothing. That is a mystical name for God according to Kabbalah. Nothingness. In Hebrew, ayin, spelled Aleph, Yud, Nun. Now what does it mean to call God nothingness? This doesn't mean that God does not exist. Rather, it's a way of saying God is no thing. I think it's better pronounced no thingness. God is no thingness. God should not be identified or limited to this or that particular thing. We find Christian mystics also using this terminology. John Scotus Erigena, a famous Christian mystic, writing in Latin, calls God nihil. Meister Eckhart, another great Christian mystic, writing in German, calls God nicht. John of the Cross, writing in Spanish, calls God nada. Nada is the same as ayin. So you have Christians and Jews. Buddhism has its own kind of negative approach. Negative I mean in a positive way, approach to this. But you find both in Judaism and Christianity, calling God no thingness. In other words, it's a way to say God is undifferentiated being. God is a being who is so great that normal language doesn't do it justice. And that's why the mystics prefer this poetic, paradoxical way of speaking of God. God is no particular thing. God is beyond all things. God is no thingness. But this mystical nothingness is not empty. It is not barren. Rather, it's fertile, overflowing, engendering the various Sefirot, and then through them, all forms of being. You'll see at the chart the name for what the very highest Sefirah. Remember, Ein Sof is not here at all. Ein Sof is the white space. What's the name for the highest Sefirah? Its official name is Keter, meaning crown, because it's a crown on the head of this whole male and female divine entity. But its other name, one of its other names, is Ayin, no thingness. So Ayin, the divine nothingness, is a name for the very first Sefirah, out of which emerge all of the other divine qualities and then all of creation. When the Kabbalists say the world was made out of nothing, they mean it in this sense. The world emanated, the world flowed out of this divine no thingness. Have I lost everyone already? Okay, good, because we're about to look at actually a passage from the Zohar, and you have to be a little lost, okay? If you're not a little lost, it's not good. It's like what they say about quantum mechanics, right? If you understand it, you haven't gotten it. So these are ideas, these are experiences that are impossible to put into words. You really have to approach this a little bit as poetry. The Zohar is making suggestions and allusions, and hopefully it touches something deep inside the soul. But the particular word or formulation, you could easily quibble with. You could easily be confused by. Since we've covered the simple stuff, let's look now at the first three of the Sefirot, the first three of these 10. I said that Keter, or the crown, is also known as the divine no-thingness. Out of this no-thingness, out of this ayin, emerges a point of light, a ray of light, and that's referred to as chokhmah, wisdom. Chokhmah literally means wisdom, but it's often described as a point, and it's called beginning. Why is this beginning? You should say Keter is the beginning, or Ein Sof is the beginning. But those are so hard to picture, you can't call it something so specific as beginning. Chokhmah is finally a ray of light, a point of light, and the Zohar chooses to call this Reshit, beginning. That point of divine wisdom expands into a circle or a palace, which is described as the next Sefirah, Bina. Bina literally means understanding, but it's being pictured here as a circle or a palace or the womb. This is the divine mother. Chokhmah is the father, and Bina is the mother. They also unite. The point of Chokhmah enters Bina. It's a seed growing within her womb. And then Bina, the divine mother, gives birth to all of the lower Sefirot. In fact, the lower Sefirot are called her children. Bina is the divine mother, and she gives birth to the 7 lower Sefirot. You can kind of draw a dotted line in between these top 3 Sefirot and the bottom 7. The bottom 7 have some psychological correspondence. We can make some sense of them. The top 3 are almost beyond comprehension, but they're described as no-thingness, father, and mother. The point of Chokhmah emerges out of Ayin, out of Keter, and then expands into the circle or enters this circle and becomes the 3rd Sefirah of Bina. Bina is also known by the divine name Elohim. Various divine names are associated with different Sefirot. For the moment, just keep in mind that Bina is called Elohim. Now, why am I telling you this? Because I now want to show you how the Zohar interprets the opening verse of the Bible. Okay, the Zohar is a commentary on the Torah. It doesn't comment on every single verse in the Torah, but it's not going to pass up the first verse of the Torah. if you're writing a commentary on the Torah, you have to say something about the first verse of the Torah. What does the Zohar say about the first verse of the Torah? Something remarkable, something almost heretical. This is an astounding reinterpretation of the text. What are the first words of the Torah? We all know them. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The Zohar, for the moment, is just focusing on the first three words in Hebrew. Bereshit, bara, Elohim. In the beginning, God created. Right? We all know those. We know those so well, we don't even think about them. In the beginning, God created. In the beginning, God created. Bereshit, bara, Elohim. But what does the Hebrew actually say? Bereshit, in the beginning. Bara means created. Elohim. In the beginning, created God. That's how the Zohar reads the Torah. In the beginning, it created God. That's how the Zohar interprets Genesis 1:1. Not in the beginning God created, in the beginning, because the Hebrew doesn't say in the beginning God created. That would be Bereshit, Elohim, bara. The Torah reads Bereshit, bara Elohim. Elohim is the object, not the subject, according to the Zohar. Now, of course, in biblical Hebrew, you don't always have to put the subject before the verb. Sometimes the subject can come after the verb, as in the first verse of the Torah. In the beginning, of course it means in the beginning God created. What else could it mean? Zohar says, no, let's read it exactly as it's written. This is how you deal with fundamentalists. So you want to read the Torah literally? Let's look at the Torah really literally. So I would call hyper-literal. The Zohar is reading the Bible hyper-literally. You want to read the Torah literally? What does it say? It doesn't say in the beginning God created. It says in the beginning, bara, it created. Because bara can mean created or it created. Either one is legitimate in Hebrew. In the beginning, it created God. Now, who's the it? You know enough Kabbalah now to say already. Who is the it? What would you guess? Ein Sof. Or Ein, something unnameable. Why isn't the subject named? Because it's unnameable. It's the ultimate reality of God. In the beginning, the ultimate reality of God created what we think of as God. Why is it plural? It's another question. It's plural because Bina gives birth to all these lower Sefirot. So she's plural, Elohim. There are many, many answers to why the Elohim is, but believe me, what we have already is enough on our plate for the moment. I'll come back to that. So in the beginning, infinity created what we think of as God. I think this in some way is a critique of our childish conceptions of God. We think we know what God is. The Zohar is saying that's just the secondary level of God. The ultimate reality of God is something beyond what you can imagine. I think that's one of the most important things the Zohar is saying. The ultimate reality of God is something beyond what we can imagine. And that's why we think it says God created. No. God is actually a product of something even prior. Now, of course, this is not against God. This is against our limited conception of God. That great, profound Christian mystic, Meister Eckhart, says something similar. He says, I'm interested in the God beyond God. That's what Eckhart said. He got in great trouble for saying that. The God beyond God. That's what the Kabbalists are talking about in speaking of Ein Sof, or Ein, the God beyond God. Now, one other element for this is just a summary. I've kind of given you the punchline of the Zohar passage I'm going to read to you. This Zohar passage is not on the page. I just want to read it to you, but I've kind of already told you what it says because it's hard to get it from the Zohar itself. It's one other element. The first word, Bereshit. Be in Hebrew, that preposition, bet, can mean in or with. And the Zohar chooses to read it as with. So it's with beginning, the unnameable one created Elohim. Now, which Sefirah is called beginning? Look at your chart. Remember that primordial point? The first point to emerge out of the no-thingness is Chokhmah, or wisdom. That's known as beginning. And we're still on the first page. Usually you finish a page and you turn it. With the Zohar, you finish a page, you're still on that page. So with beginning, with Chachma, that's how the Zohar is reading, Bereshit. With beginning, not in the beginning, with beginning, by means of beginning, the unnameable one created Bina. Bina, who's known by that divine name, Elohim. Okay, we now have enough to listen to the passage of the Zohar I want to read to you. For this passage, I'd like you to just close your eyes and listen to the Zohar's interpretation of Bereshit bara Elohim. With beginning, it created God. Bereshit, in the beginning. At the head of potency of the king, he engraved engravings in luster on high. A spark of impenetrable darkness flashed within the concealed of the concealed, from the head of infinity. A cluster of vapor, forming in formlessness, thrust in a ring, not white, not black, not red, not green, no color at all. As a cord surveyed, it yielded radiant colors. Deep within the spark gushed a flow, splaying colors below, concealed within the concealed of the mystery of Ein Sof. It split and did not split its aura, was not known at all, until under the impact of splitting, a single concealed supernal point shone. Beyond that point, nothing is known. So it is called Reshit, beginning, first command of all. The enlightened will shine like the Zohar of the sky, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Zohar, radiance, concealed of concealed, struck its aura, which touched and did not touch this point. Then this beginning expanded, building itself a palace, worthy of glorious praise. There it sowed seed to give birth, benefiting worlds. Zohar, radiance, sowing seed for its glory, like the seed of fine purple silk, wrapping itself within, weaving itself a palace, constituting its praise, benefiting all. With this beginning, the unknown concealed one created the palace. This palace is called Elohim, God. The secret is Bereshit, bara Elohim. With beginning, created God. That's crystal clear. Okay. Okay, we can turn the page. We've now covered the first quote, but I now plan to move a little more quickly. So ultimately, God is beyond gender. Ein Sof is really not God as he. Ein Sof is beyond he or she. But as I said, one of the radical innovations of the Zohar is to describe the feminine divinity, the feminine nature of God. And for the rest of our time this evening, for my remaining three and a half hours, for the next 20 minutes or so, I want to focus on Shekhinah, the divine feminine. We're moving from the very top of the Sefirot, Ein Sof and Ayin, and these ethereal stages, to the romance of God, the union of the male and female, of Tiferet and Shekhinah, or Tiferet and Malchut. Okay, if you see that last circle, if you look back at the chart and see Malchut, just remember I'm calling her Shekhinah tonight, the divine feminine presence. And I really want to step back a little bit before the Kabbalah and see what is going on here with this word Shekhinah. Okay, some things the Zohar or the Kabbalah invents. And by the way, it's easy to confuse Zohar and Kabbalah. What's the difference? Zohar is a book. There's no book called the Kabbalah. Okay, Kabbalah is the name for the whole movement, the whole philosophy of Jewish mysticism. The Zohar is the major text of the Kabbalah. So I may use them interchangeably. Zohar is a book, Kabbalah is the movement or the philosophy. Some names for God, the Zohar or the Kabbalah invents, Ein Sof. You never find the name Ein Sof in any Jewish text before the Kabbalah. It's never mentioned in the Bible, never mentioned in the Talmud or the Midrash. Shekhinah, on the other hand, appears very frequently in the Talmud and the Midrash, never in the Bible, although you do have the root shachan. God says, have them build me a holy place, v'shachanti b'tocham, I will dwell among them. So God promises to dwell among the people of Israel, and that's the verb used, shachan, to dwell. So what does Shekhinah mean? Shekhinah means God's dwelling in the world. God's being present in the world. The full noun Shekhinah does not appear in the Bible, but the rabbis use it very frequently. For example, the rabbis ask, why did God appear to Moses in a what? In a bush. Couldn't God have picked something a little more impressive? I mean, a sycamore tree, a cypress. Why some shrub? To show you, look at quote number 2 on the second page. There is no place empty of Shekhinah. That's why God appeared to Moses in a bush. To show you, En makom ba'aretz. There's no place on earth, panui min hashchina. It shows you what Shekhinah means. Shekhinah means God's presence in the world. Don't think that God is just in heaven, that God is seated on some throne, purely transcendent, surrounding all the worlds. God fills the worlds. So Shekhinah is the name that you find in the Talmud or the Midrash to emphasize God's presence in the world. Not only God's presence in the world, God's intimacy with the Jewish people. The next quote, wherever Israel went in exile, Shekhinah was with them. B'chol makom shegalu, in Hebrew, B'chol makom shegalu, Shekhinah imahem. It's a beautiful passage. This shows you what Shekhinah means. Shekhinah is God's loving care of the people of Israel. God is not removed. God is not purely transcendent. God dwells in the world. God dwells with us. That's what Shekhinah conveys in rabbinic literature. Okay, this is hundreds of years before the Zohar, before the Kabbalah. This is good rabbinic traditional Judaism. Shekhinah is God's presence in the world, God's love of Israel. Or the next passage, happy are the righteous, for they cause Shekhinah to dwell on earth. Now that's interesting. You could say, well, Shekhinah is on earth. In some sense, God is on earth. In another sense, God isn't really here unless we invite him in, or her in. If you make room in your life for God, then God really becomes real in your life. If you help your neighbor, that brings Shekhinah into the world. If you act in loving ways, if you act ethically, if you cultivate some spiritual lifestyle, then you're making a place for God in the world. In a sense, you're causing God to dwell in the world. It's as if we have power over God. That's suggested in rabbinic texts, and it's emphasized in the Zohar. God actually needs us. It's one of the radical teachings in Kabbalah, with roots in rabbinic Judaism. God needs us. God is incomplete without us. One of the most beautiful names for Shekhinah in the Kabbalah is the secret of the possible. Shekhinah is the secret of the possible. In other words, God is potentially in the world, but it's up to us to actualize that divine potential by how we live, by how we act, by how we use our gifts. Now the question is, though, okay, Shekhinah does appear in rabbinic Judaism, but is Shekhinah feminine? Because I said one of the radical innovations of the Kabbalah is to say there's a male and female half of God. Now you never find in rabbinic Judaism the idea that God is married to the Shekhinah. That the male half of God is married to the Shekhinah. You could never find a line like that before the Kabbalah. But you do have this line. Look at quote number 5. This is from the Talmud. When Rav Yosef heard his mother's footsteps, he would say, I will arise before Shekhinah, who is approaching. Somehow he identified his mother with the Shekhinah. So in some sense, Shekhinah does already have a feminine valence, a feminine sense. But it's the Zohar that really applies that to the divine. Okay, so what happens in Kabbalah? What happens to this idea of Shekhinah? Now Shekhinah is not just the divine presence, or the divine intimacy with Israel. Those ideas are still taught very frequently. The new element is the romantic motif and the erotic motif. The romance between Shekhinah and the Holy One, blessed be He, becomes the central theme of the Zohar. Their union is the goal of religion. How do we unite these two halves of God? By enacting the mitzvot. This is very typical of the Kabbalah, very radical and very traditional simultaneously. It's a radical new depiction that God is male and female, but how do you bring about the divine union? How do you bring about the divine wedding? Through doing the most traditional thing possible, through enacting the commandments. You might say every mitzvah now becomes, as I said to Aaron Howard a couple weeks ago, and some of you may have seen, every mitzvah becomes an aphrodisiac. That's what happens in Kabbalah. The mitzvot you do not because you have to do them, you do them because that's how you stimulate the love between the Shekhinah and the Holy One, blessed be He. According to the Zohar, if you stay up all night, you know the custom of staying up all night on Shavuot, right? The eve of Shavuot, traditionally Jews would stay up all night and study Torah. This idea is never described anywhere in Judaism until the Zohar. The Zohar is the first text to describe it. What do they say? They say, by studying the Torah all night, you are adorning the Shekhinah with jewels. Every book of the Bible that you read, or that you even read one verse out of each book, each of those 24 books of the Bible become one of the 24 jewels that a bride should be wearing. And then the Shekhinah is fully adorned with her jewels, and she becomes wedded to the Holy One, blessed be He, at sunrise or on Shavuot morning. So this is an example of taking something very traditional, the study of Torah, the fulfillment of the commandments, but now transforming it with a mystical reading. It becomes a spiritual adventure rather than the strict law you have to fulfill. That's what the Zohar is doing again and again. Not changing the tradition, but in some way radically changing it. Now, I mentioned that the Zohar is new and ancient simultaneously, and this applies very dramatically to Shekhinah. Because, on the one hand, it's a radical innovation to say that God is feminine, or half feminine. To say that in the Western world, right, in the Western religious world, to say that God is equally male and female sounds shocking. But in some ways it's not new, in some ways it's very old. Because it goes back even earlier than the Bible. Why do I say that? Because we know in the ancient Near East, there was great worship of the goddess. How do we know that? Because the prophets are always criticizing the people, castigating the people for going after the false gods and goddesses of Canaan. Right? We actually know her name or her names. The Canaanite goddess is called Asherah, Ashtoret, Anat. These were goddesses that were very appealing not only to the Canaanites but to the Israelites. There were certainly Israelites who worshiped the goddess. How do we know that? Because the prophets are saying don't do it. Right? The prophets only say don't do it if the people are doing it. So we know that the people were going after the gods and goddesses. You could say that Judaism, biblical Judaism, expunged the goddess. Biblical Judaism eliminated the goddess. And somehow that goddess now re-emerges in Kabbalah. One scholar has called this the revenge of myth. The mythic notion that God is male and female had been read out of Judaism, and now somehow right in the heart of rabbinic Judaism it re-emerges as Shekhinah. Now this is what's interesting. It's not just that there were Israelites who were going after the gods of Canaan. It's not that they were rejecting the God of Israel and instead worshiping the Canaanite goddess. Some of them wanted to combine the goddess with the God of Israel. We know, for example, there's archaeologists have dug up pottery on which is written, for example, 25 miles south of Jerusalem. An inscription was found, this is from the 8th century BCE, during the time of the First Temple, to Yud-He-Vav-He, right, that unpronounceable name of God. No one really knows how to pronounce it. Yahweh, Jehovah, those are all guesses. To Yud-He-Vav-He, my protector, and to his Asherah. There were Israelites trying to combine the worship of the God of Israel with Asherah. That was rejected by biblical Judaism, rejected by all the biblical authors, and yet that now reemerges within Judaism in the form of Kabbalah. You could say the goddess has now become kosher. That's really what happens with the phenomenon of Shekinah. So in that way, it's both new and ancient. What the Zohar is saying is that we have to rediscover this feminine half of God, the feminine notion of God, which had been rejected, maybe for good reasons, maybe because there were unethical practices, maybe there were pagan fertility rites that the prophets wanted to eliminate from Judaism. So not only did they eliminate the rite, they eliminated the goddess entirely. Okay, for whatever reason, the goddess was eliminated, but that yearning for the feminine, the yearning to see God as feminine, could never be suppressed. Okay, it reemerges in Christianity in the form of Mary. Right? Mary is given a semi-divine status. And that certainly influences the Kabbalah. As the Christians are rediscovering Mary, the Kabbalists are rediscovering the Shekinah as a feminine half of God. So you could say we've lost our awareness of the feminine. And according to the Zohar, that loss actually originated in the Garden of Eden. Okay, the time is growing a little late, so I want to look with you at one last passage on the third page. The long passage 7 we're going to skip for the moment. You can look at that on your own. I want to look at a short passage, number 6. This, to my mind, is one of the most beautiful teachings in the Zohar. This is a commentary on, remember the Zohar is a commentary on the Torah. We saw what the Zohar did with the creation, right? In the beginning God created, became in the beginning, it created God. This is just a couple chapters later. Let's see what the Zohar does with throwing Adam out of the garden. Now, what could you really do with that? It's very clear. Adam and Eve ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and God expelled them from the garden. Now look at the Hebrew letters. Even those of you who don't know much Hebrew, look at the Hebrew at the top of the page we're on, the last page. It says number 6. There are 3 Hebrew words there. Vayigaresh et ha'adam. Okay, which means, the English is there right afterward in italics, he drove out Adam. Right? This describes what God did. Adam and Eve ate from the fruit. Vayigaresh et ha'adam. God expelled, to drive out, God expelled Adam. But notice what the Hebrew says. It doesn't say he drove out Adam, it says he drove out et Adam. Now what does this word et mean? Right. Et means nothing. Now you already know to say nothing is a very dangerous thing. Why do I say et means nothing? You can't translate the word et, usually. Et is simply a marker that has to precede the direct object. Technically, if the direct object has a definite article. Okay, so if you have an object that says the, or you have a person, like Adam, you have to say before it et. In Hebrew, you can't say, I drank the water. Okay? Baruch atah Adonai mechalam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. In Hebrew, you can't say, I drank the water. You have to say, I drank et the water. Shatiti et hamayim. You can't say, Shatiti hamayim. I drank the water. Shatiti et hamayim. So what is et? It's simply a particle. That's what grammarians call a word that they can't explain. A particle. It's a particle that has to precede the direct object. It has no independent meaning. Now this is too good for any rabbi or mystic to pass up. A word that says something but doesn't mean anything? Okay, that's an opportunity for interpretation. In fact, you have rabbis who built their entire careers out of interpreting words like that. One of them was Rabbi Akiva. The great teacher Rabbi Akiva actually tried to interpret et whatever he could. Finally, someone came up to him and said, enough, stop already, dayecha. Not dayenu, enough with you. Dayecha, enough already, stop with those ets. For example, Akiva said, there's a verse in Deuteronomy, et ha'elohim tiraun, be in awe of God. But the Hebrew says, et, be in awe of et God. Akiva said, what does that mean, et? It means also be in awe of your rabbi. In other words, et is an opportunity to expand the meaning of the sentence. If the word et appears, the Torah wouldn't put a word for nothing. If the word et appears there and it doesn't seem to have a meaning, you can come up with a meaning. Okay, so already the rabbis interpret the word et, and the Zohar just goes a little further. The Zohar says the word et is actually a code name for who? Now, I should give you a hint. Any question I ask for the next 10 minutes, the correct answer is Shekhinah. So et is a code name for who? For Shekhinah. Now, why is she et? Because what is et made of? Aleph, Taf. The first letter of the Hebrew alphabet and the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's a word that encompasses everything and means nothing, so it could mean anything you want almost. The Zohar say, why is Shekhinah et? Because Keter, the first Sefirot, is appropriately symbolized by Aleph. Shekhinah, she's not Taf, she's Aleph to Taf. Because Shekhinah, being the last of the 10 Sefirot, includes all of them. She is known as et. Okay, so what does the Zohar do with this verse? That's all we need to know to begin. I'm back at the teaching itself, the top of the page. He drove out et ha'adam. Rabbi Elazar said, we do not know who divorced whom. Now why does he say divorced? Because the Hebrew verb legaresh could mean to drive out or expel, could also mean to divorce. And the Midrash actually already says Adam, it's as if Adam was married to God and then God divorced him. That's why it says vayigaresh, God divorced Adam. That's already in the Midrash. Okay, the Zohar says, who divorced whom? Did the Blessed Holy One divorce Adam, or, now what's the alternative? You said it. Okay, the Zohar is not going to say something that shocking. The Zohar just says, or not. But reading it, you can't help but come up with the alternative. Wait a minute, if God didn't divorce Adam, if God didn't kick Adam out, then Adam kicked God out? Yes. That's how the Zohar reads the verse. Now how can I read the verse that way? The verse doesn't say that. The verse says, Vayigaresh et Adam. But the word is transposed. Don't put the period after Adam, put the period after et. He drove out et. Now who is et? Who is et? Okay, he drove out the Shekhinah. Who drove out et? The next word tells you, Adam. That's how he reads the verse. Okay, obviously this is doing violence to the verse. And the Zohar knows that's not what the verse means. But the Zohar wants to teach something. In order to teach something, it's willing to turn the verse on its head. That's why he says the word is transposed. Actually, can mean the word is turned upside down. Not God divorcing Adam, not God expelling Adam. Adam expelled God. Vayigaresh et. He drove out the Shekhinah. Who drove out the Shekhinah? Go on, the next word tells you, Adam. Adam actually drove out et. Consequently, it's written, Yud-Heh-Vav Elohim, this double name for God, expelled him from the Garden of Eden. That's in the preceding verse. So the Zohar is willing to admit that God did expel Adam. But why did God expel him? Because Adam had expelled Shekhinah, as we have explained. That's lovely, as we have explained. This is what I call instant tradition. Okay, the Zohar said it, it's like, oh, this is venerable teaching already, as we have explained 2 lines earlier. And he didn't really explain it. He didn't come out and say Shekhinah. The Zohar very rarely comes out and says what it means. Okay, 50 pages later, it might tell you that et is a code name for Shekhinah. Okay, that's how the Zohar is disguising its radical teachings. So what does this mean? What could this possibly mean? That Adam drove out Shekhinah? I think it's the Zohar's way of saying each of us does that in our life. Each of us loses touch with the divine presence, with the divine potential. And because we drive out God from our lives, because we lose sight of the spiritual possibilities, we find ourselves alienated. We find ourselves in a state of exile. We find ourselves out of the garden. So the challenge is to reacquaint ourselves with the divine presence through community, through family, through cultivating a spiritual life, and thereby to reanimate the tradition, to fulfill our own self, and to bring out the potential of the divine. Okay, I think that's enough for one evening. On my side, I'll be happy to take questions if you have. Please. Yeah. Here, Genesis uses both Adam and Ha-Adam. Ha-Adam technically means the human being, whereas Adam is, the name for Adam. But the Zohar doesn't dwell on that here. Other places it might. Yeah, I think in Genesis, I think it's almost exclusively Ha-Adam. Ha-Adam. I can't think of offhand of a verse in Genesis where it's Adam without the Ha. We translate it Adam, but technically it's the human. And Fox, I think, probably translates it that way, the human. Yes?
So if, by enacting the commandments,
Right.
or having an aphrodisiacal effect, and if the main commandment that we see is you shall love the Lord your God, the Ahavta,
Mm-hmm.
what is how you seem to be saying that Zohar doesn't want to anthropomorphize, but we humans tend to do that, and when we say love, we tend to think of earthly erotics. So what's this text becomes rather erotic, and then you've got God being sort of regendered, male and female.
Right.
Isn't all this very radical? How
Right.
do we begin to deal with the erotic aspect of God being sort of androgynous?
Yeah, I mean, I would not say that the Zohar is trying to avoid being anthropomorphic. Okay, those of you who don't understand that fancy word, anthropomorphic simply means describing God in human terms. Anthropos, man or human, morphe, form. Giving a human form to God is anthropomorphism, or giving a human form to anything. But in theological language, anthropomorphism means describing God in human terms. Now that's a very important question. Maimonides really, put this on the map. Maimonides' great agenda is what? To try to eliminate anthropomorphism from God. Maimonides is very bothered by the descriptions in the Bible of God's hand, God's eye, God's foot. He doesn't have to deal with God's erotic elements. You don't find those described. The Zohar does. So that Maimonides is trying to cleanse God of all anthropomorphism. So what kind of God does Maimonides end up with? Basically a very abstract God. And that's what the Kabbalists are reacting against. So that, in a sense, you're right, the Zohar accepts Maimonides. Where do you find Maimonides? Which thing I've talked about would you say is closest to Maimonides' God? Of all this. Certainly not Shekhinah. Ein, or Ein Sof. God is infinity, or God is no thingness. Maimonides would be pretty comfortable with that. You could really say Ein Sof is the Kabbalist's way of imitating Maimonides. But the Kabbalists realize that kind of God is just so cold and removed and abstract that what happens is people can't relate to it. That was the problem with Maimonides. Maimonides was great for the philosophers, but once the common people heard about that, someone said, God is just beyond, and it doesn't really matter whether I keep Shabbos or not, or, what, do we really have to shake the lulav? Can't I just, think of God? That's enough. So there was a great social problem, great social crisis in European Jewry when Maimonides' ideas started to filter out to the masses. And there was a reaction against Maimonides, and that's what the Kabbalists really express. They're willing to accept that ultimately Maimonides is right about the ultimate reality of God is Ein Sof, is a Maimonidean God. But then they say, once we've said that, 99% of the Zohar is not about Ein Sof. It's not even about Ayin. It's about the romance. It's about God's right arm. Chesed, I said, is Abraham, but it's also on the right, it's God's right arm. Gevurah is on the left, it's God's left arm. And what does God do with his right arm and his left arm? He hugs the Shekhinah. So God becomes all the more anthropomorphic. You think the Bible is anthropomorphic? The Zohar is 100 times more anthropomorphic. So the Zohar is simultaneously Maimonidean and anthropomorphic. And Maimonides would have turned over in his grave to see what happens, here with the Sefirot. The Kabbalists claim that at the end of his life, Maimonides converted to Kabbalah. According to the Kabbalists, Maimonides became a Kabbalist. But Maimonides would turn over in his grave to see a divine romance being described. But for the Zohar, Maimonides had made God so removed and so abstract, they come back with a vengeance, and they want to have their cake and eat it too. They're not naive enough to go back to a simple pre-Maimonidean idea. God is in heaven, we worship God. They accept Maimonides as describing the ultimate God, but now they find God to be all the more approachable. And for some critics of Kabbalah, it was too much in the other extreme.
Now, how do modern Kabbalists reconcile Adam being the first man when fossil records show that humans came from apes millions and millions of years ago?
How does Kabbalah reconcile belief with evolution, belief with science? Yeah, I want to distinguish myself from Kabbalah here. I'm glad you asked that question for a couple reasons, but one is this. I am not suggesting that we become Kabbalists. I think there's some great insights in Kabbalah. I think Kabbalah is a wonderful resource for contemporary Jewish spirituality, for contemporary Jewish thought, but I think one has to approach it critically and selectively, to look for the elements that are valuable within Kabbalah, but not to throw out all of human learning that has accumulated since. So I don't want to misrepresent Kabbalah here. A fundamental, orthodox Kabbalist today might well reject Darwin, might well reject science. But I would say we have to learn from Kabbalah and also be open to the insights of science. And those of you who can come tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I'm going to give a talk on God and the Big Bang, on reconciling Kabbalah and science. But maybe one or two more questions, and then I'll be happy to talk to people informally afterward. Please. Yes. Yes. You took away from me one of the lines I was going to use tomorrow morning. Yes, in a beginning, literally Bereshit. I don't know in the Zohar. I use it. I'm going to mention it tomorrow morning. I haven't seen it anywhere else, but it very well could be mentioned. It could be somewhere else. But literally, Bereshit is more accurately translated in a beginning than in the beginning, as if there were other universes. And the Midrash actually already says that. God created worlds and destroyed them. So finally he said, this one's good. That's actually in the Midrash. It's hard for me to stop questions. So both of yours, and then we'll take a break.
But let's actually confuse the matter even more.
Okay.
If you go into the Aramaic, then you could translate it as created six.
Barashit, that's how the Zohar reads it. Bereshit is really two words. Barashit, created six. No, created the six Sefirot. Bina, who's called Elohim. Elohim creates these six, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, all of which unite with the seventh Shekhinah. That's how the Zohar reads it. Barashit, created six. Sefer Yetzirah. That was in the full version of this talk, but I skipped over it, just didn't want to get super technical. Sefer Yetzirah is the book of formation, or the book of creation, is an early mystical writing. Some people would call it proto-Kabbalistic or pre-Kabbalistic. Nobody knows exactly when it was written. Probably around the 1st or 2nd century of the Common Era. In other words, 1,000 years before the Zohar. Around the time of the Mishnah. Around the time of that real historical figure, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It's the first book, some people consider it the first book of Jewish mysticism. It's a little booklet. You can read it in 20 minutes. You won't understand it. You can read it in 20 minutes. No one knows what it means. Every Kabbalist, it was kind of almost one of their assignments to write a commentary on Sefer Yetzirah. So you have dozens of commentaries on Sefer Yetzirah. The philosophers say, this proves philosophy. The Kabbalists say, this proves Kabbalah. But the important thing for Kabbalah, I would say, is that that's the first book to ever use the phrase Eser Sefirot, 10 Sefirot. That's how this image of the 10 Sefirot first appears. It doesn't there mean this whole array that I've described, There it actually means, what does the word Sefirah mean? I've avoided translating it because it's hard to translate. It sounds like sphere. It doesn't really mean sphere. It really means number. 10 numbers. It really means the numbers 1 to 10. In the first book of Jewish mysticism, Sefirot means the numbers 1 to 10. Because how does God create the world? How does God create the world? According to Genesis, through speech. According to Sefer Yetzirah, through speech and numbers. The world is built out of numbers. Now, any mathematician, any physicist would agree with that totally. The world is based on number. The world is structured mathematically. This goes back to Pythagoras, right? We all know that Pythagoras is the Pythagorean triangle. Well, Pythagoras was in love with numbers. He thought the world was built out of numbers. And Sefer Yetzirah is a Pythagorean text. It's a neo-Pythagorean Jewish text. It was influenced by Pythagoras' teachings. It melded them with teachings of Judaism, and that's what you have in Sefer Yetzirah. The breaking of the vessels. Breaking of the vessels is an idea in Kabbalah that I'll talk about tomorrow. It's a little bit later than the Zohar. In its full formulation, it's more Tzfat, Isaac Luria, the 16th century, about 300 years after the Zohar. But I'll discuss it tomorrow because there's a parallel between the breaking of the vessels and modern cosmology, what it teaches about the Big Bang. Thank you.
Friends, what a magnificent beginning to our program that continues tomorrow morning. I know that there's a lot to sleep on tonight, or perhaps not to sleep on tonight. We're going to be dreaming and having all kinds of visions of Shekhinah, which is a beautiful thing to have happen. Daniel Mann is a marvelous and inspired teacher. What a gift that you are. Thank you for being in Houston at Beth Israel. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll enjoy all the company you wish to share with us the rest of the evening, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. Thank you. Beautiful.